All right, ready to dive into a world of pointy ears and magic? We're tackling elves today, but you might be surprised at just how deep this rabbit hole goes.
That's right. There's way more to them than meets the eye. We're going to go way beyond Santa's workshop today.
Exactly. We got a great report here. It's like our elf encyclopedia. Origins, powers, you name it. Even how they pop up in our world today.
Yeah, should be a fun one.
By the end of this, you'll be a certified elf expert. So, where do we even begin with these creatures?
Well, we got to start at the beginning, right? Norse mythology. That's where the word elf comes from. And, well, it's not all sunshine and rainbows like you see in some stories.
Oh, okay. So, not those cheerful little guys helping Santa.
Not quite. The ancient Norse called them Elfar. They were a bit more complicated.
Complicated how?
Well, you had your light elves. They were all about nature, beauty, light. But then there were the dark elves. And they were, well, a bit more mysterious. Lived in shadows, you know?
So like right off the bat, we see there's this duality to their nature, like nature itself. Light and dark.
Yeah, exactly. And they weren't always the good guys either. Some were tricksters, some could be downright harmful. Makes them pretty interesting.
I bet. Imagine running into an elf back then. Could have been magical, could have been terrifying.
For sure. And their story doesn't end there. They pop up all over European folklore, always changing, taking on new characteristics.
So how'd they go from these complex figures in myth to like the elves we see in fantasy novels and games today?
Well, their image kind of evolved, right? Got woven into different cultures, like in Germanic folklore, they were nature spirits, and the Celts, they kind of blended elf and fairy traditions together.
So that whole connection to nature, magic, the mystical side of things, that seems to be a constant thread through their history.
Oh, definitely. But there are some classic elf traits that have stuck around. They're still seen as slender, graceful, with those pointy ears we all know.
You gotta love those long lifespans. Maybe even immortality. It's like they embody this ageless thing that we find so fascinating.
Right. And of course, their connection to magic, to enchantment, that's huge. Some stories even say they could shapeshift, disappear into a forest or take on different forms.
Whoa, now that's some serious magic.
Yeah.
But we've been talking about individual elves. What about their societies? Like, did they have these hidden kingdoms? You know, like we see in Lord of the Rings?
Yeah. Their societies are just as interesting. They're often shown living in close-knit communities, super connected to nature. Could be a hidden forest kingdom or a city under a hill, who knows? But they valued wisdom, art, harmony, that kind of thing.
Sounds pretty idyllic, like perfect balance between nature and civilization.
Yeah.
But was it all peaceful? Or was there, drama, conflict?
Oh, of course. No society is perfect, right? Even with magical beings. Elves, for all their wisdom and grace, could also be kind of unpredictable, even vengeful if they felt threatened.
Right, makes sense. Like this mix of power and vulnerability. That's what makes them so interesting. But so far we've been talking myths, folklore. How'd they make their way into modern fantasy?
Well, that's where literature comes in. We see them popping up in medieval stories, sometimes mischievous, sometimes guardians of nature.
Oh, and can't forget Shakespeare. Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream, that little trickster. But I have a feeling you're about to mention the real game changer when it comes to elves.
You got it. J.R.R. Tolkien. He really shaped how we see them today.
Tolkien, the king of fantasy. Yeah, his elves were something else. Those noble warriors, so wise, so powerful, like Legolas or Galadriel. It's like he took those old whispers of magic and created something, well, epic.
Absolutely. Tolkien's influence is huge. And from him, elves explode onto the scene. Dungeons and Dragons, The Witcher, Warcraft, you name it, they're everywhere in fantasy.
It's amazing how much they've evolved from those ancient myths. But even with all the changes, there's something about them that just grabs us. Why do you think they hold such a powerful place in our imaginations?
It's a great question. And it goes way beyond pointy ears and magic spells. We had to look at the deeper meaning, the symbolism behind these creatures. That's where it gets really interesting.
Ooh, okay, listeners, get ready. We're going even deeper down the rabbit hole. We're going to explore what elves represent, how they connect to us in the real world. You won't want to miss this. Okay, so we've gone through the myths, the legends, all that. But now I'm really curious about the deeper stuff. Like, what do these creatures actually symbolize? Why do they still kind of fascinate us?
It's a good question. Elves have always been linked to nature. Like, they embody its beauty, its wildness, even that ancient wisdom you find in nature.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that's been there from the start. Norse myths, all the way to modern fantasy, they're almost always in forests, using nature magic.
Right. And it makes us think about our own relationship with nature, right? Like maybe they offer a glimpse into a more balanced way of being.
Interesting.
But there's more to it than that. They also symbolize beauty, immortality, that allure of the unknown, like a realm beyond what we see every day.
So it's not just about pretty forests and living forever. It's about wanting something more, something magical we might have lost touch with.
I think so. They remind us of the mystery that's still out there if we just open our eyes to it. But there's another layer to their symbolism, one that's a bit more complex.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. What do you mean?
Well, think about how elves are often portrayed, different from us, living in their own societies with their own unique abilities. They become a way to explore, like, what it means to be the other.
Ah, I see. So it's like looking at ourselves in a mirror, how we interact with the world, with people who are different from us, all those anxieties and hopes we have.
Exactly. And speaking of the real world, remember that thing about Iceland and their elf consultants?
Oh, yeah. That was wild. Construction projects changing to avoid disturbing invisible elf homes. Like, that's straight out of a fairy tale.
Well, in Iceland, belief in elves is a big deal. It's not just a superstition, it's woven into their culture. And while we might not all be hiring elf consultants, it does show how powerful those beliefs can be and how they shape how we interact with our world.
That's a great point. So we see elves in stories, but they can actually impact our real lives too. But what about, like, the psychology behind it all? What makes us so drawn to these creatures?
Some psychologists think it comes down to a need for wonder, a desire to connect with something bigger than ourselves, something, well, magical.
Yeah, like we're trying to get back that sense of awe we had as kids.
Yeah,
Elves become this portal to a world where magic is still real.
that's it. And who knows, maybe there's a little truth to it all. Maybe we all have a spark of that elf magic inside us.
I like that idea. Maybe we're all secretly looking for it. But beyond just escaping into fantasy, it seems like there's a deeper lesson here. Like, what can we learn from these creatures, even if they're just in our imagination?
I think they offer us a chance to, like, really look at ourselves, our relationship with nature, with each other, even with the unknown. They challenge us to think about what it means to be human, to live in harmony with the world, to be okay with the mysteries we don't understand.
That's pretty deep. It's amazing how much meaning there is in these creatures, even if they're not real in the traditional sense. So if we had to pick one big takeaway from all this, what would it be?
The biggest thing I'd say is that elves represent something timeless. Whether they're ancient beings or Tolkien's warriors, it doesn't matter. They remind us of the magic that's still out there, both in ourselves and in the natural world.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. And it's a perfect way to move into our final discussion. We're going to imagine how elves might see our modern world. And let me tell you, it'll make you think. So stick around. Okay, so we've explored their history, their symbolism. But now I want to get into something really interesting. What if elves did exist? Like walking among us? How do you think they'd see our modern world?
It's a fun thought experiment. Given their whole vibe, you know, nature lovers, ancient wisdom, I think they'd have some thoughts about how we live today.
Yeah, I don't see them being too thrilled about, like, skyscrapers and traffic jams. Our constant need for, well, everything. Doesn't exactly scream elf paradise, does it?
Not really. They might see our obsession with progress and tech as kind of a disconnect from nature. Like we've lost sight of what really matters.
It's like that saying, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. Elves, with their long lives, they definitely get that.
Exactly. And maybe that's part of why we're drawn to them. They represent a perspective we've lost, that reminder that everything's connected, that we need to protect the world for the future.
So it's not just about escaping into fantasy. It's about actually learning from these creatures, seeing the world through their eyes.
Right. They challenge us to think differently, to maybe adopt a different set of values.
It's like they're showing us a different path, a different way to be.
I like that. A different way to be.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. Myths, symbolism, even psychology. And it's clear elves are way more than just like pointy-eared characters in stories. They reflect us, you know, our hopes, our fears, that fascination we have with magic and the unknown.
And they remind us that even in this crazy world, there's still room for wonder, for magic, for that connection to nature, to ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. I think that's the perfect note to end on. So listeners, next time you think about elves, remember, there's a lot more to them than meets the eye. They're a reflection of us, our desires, our worries, that part of us that wants something more.
And hey, who knows? Maybe there is a little bit of elf magic in all of us, just waiting to be found.
I love that. Well, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of elves. We hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep that sense of wonder alive.